Hello and welcome at the GCP-Mindset channel. I hope you're doing well. Today we speak about a very modern and I think also interesting topic. It's about electronic patient-reported outcome, or short ePRO. And I have my expert Sebastian Fessel here with me, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Andreas, for the warm welcome. And I'm really looking forward to answer all your questions about the electronic data capture and especially about the ePRO.
Thanks. Me too. Sebastian, thank you very much for being here to speak with me about electronic data capture. I know you as an expert for clinical research. You are especially an expert in EDC systems and also ePRO, and I know that you also developed your own ePRO system together with your team. Maybe you can tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Yes, thank you, Andreas. I'm now for a good 5 years in clinical research. I'm working in a clinical research organization in clinical data management. And as you already announced, one of my major aims of work is the electronic data capture in different systems and the ePRO. And main focus of my work is also to do a lot of consulting and work with the clients to get the best out of the systems possible.
Thank you. But when you're working for a CRO, what's the reason? Why have you developed your own ePRO system? There are so many systems on the market already, and what's the rationale behind it?
Yes, you have already mentioned there are quite a lot of ePRO solutions on the market, and we have observed quite a lot of them. And we always recognized, on the one hand, there is often a huge amount of costs connected to ePRO, and many people complain about the complexity. So these were rationales for us to develop an own ePRO and especially target these two drawbacks of many commercial ePRO solutions. So we've decided on the one hand to go to a fully web-based application so that you do not need any special device or any specific hardware, but can use whatever you use in the daily life to complete the ePRO. And in addition, our system was aimed to be as easy as possible, especially for the data manager who needs to do the setup work and for the site staff who needs to manage the subjects in the system.
Okay, that makes sense. In summary, you wanted to make it more cost effectively and more simple for the users.
Yes, Andreas, you are right. We have seen that most of the commercial solutions are quite expensive and more targeted onto the big pharma companies, whereas our clients often are usually small to mid-sized companies who do not have so much money. So this was one of the major goals, to develop our own ePRO to also offer them an affordable solution. And in addition, developing an own ePRO also enables us to directly integrate this part of clinical data capture into our complete clinical trial management software solution.
That makes, of course, completely sense. But let's ask another question. How useful is it anyway to collect data from patients directly? We know that the variation of patient-reported outcome is quite large. That means we need more patients to evaluate these data. So why do we collect data from patients directly?
So you are right with the variation, but I always also compare past and present paper-reported outcome and electronic outcome. And if you do that, you can get much better compliance and much better answers if you directly collect the data electronically, as you can narrow down the windows when answers can be provided, and you can also prohibit false answers you don't need, and by that the electronic patient data is they're more reliable. You get a higher compliance, and by that you need less patients for your trial and again end up with lower costs.
Yeah. But is it really mandatory to ask questions?
It is not mandatory, but there are quite some factors which can be better asked directly to patients. If you think of pain or anxiety events, they can be more realistic, assessed directly by the patients once the event occurs, and not they need to recall it during the next study visit. And anyways, it's a trend you can see in clinical research, and even the federal organizations like the Food and Drug Administration in United States highly encourage and for several kinds of studies even expect that you also collect patient outcome.
Sebastian, you just mentioned already one example, pain measurement, but what kind of other parameters are measured via ePRO?
So one prominent example is whenever you need patient satisfaction. So standard in the industry is to ask for quality of life with predefined questions and how well the patients are. And another quite prominent example is to use ePRO whenever you are interested in collecting specific events. If you, for example, think of incontinence and want to collect whenever your participant has issues with an incontinence event, or other studies where specific events should be collected, then it's quite helpful to use an ePRO. And just one question to illustrate this, do you remember just spontaneously what you had on Thursday for dinner?
Sorry, no, I don't remember.
And now you see why it is so helpful to have an ePRO solution at hand to capture specific events directly upon occurrence.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But you mentioned already pain, incontinence, diaries, I guess, but what medical data can be captured with ePRO?
So you already mentioned quite some examples. On the medical scale, you can collect, as mentioned, pain. For example, we use visual analog scales where participant rates, for example, from 0 to 10, how intense the pain was. You can ask specific questions about satisfaction or quality of life. You mentioned the diaries, so also free texts, but we also see an increased need to also incorporate additional data. So think about, for example, more and more people using wearables like smartwatches that collect heart rates, blood pressure. And we get more and more requests to also get this data into an ePRO and connect it to patient data.
Personally, I worked the first time with ePRO about 15 years ago. And at that time, we still used PALMs for electronic patient-reported outcome. Nowadays, probably most of the people, at least our watchers, I think they don't know what is PALM anymore. But it was quite complicated and the data were not of very good quality because most of the patients were completely overloaded with information. It was too complex for them. And still nowadays I hear from sponsors, is ePRO also for older patients or is it only for young people? What's your thinking about that?
So I think ePRO is for everyone. So you already mentioned the past with designated devices for ePRO that were hard to correctly use and enter all the data. And there I would also agree that this was more for the younger people who are familiar also with some more exotic kind of devices and hardware. Nowadays the trend in ePRO goes to web-based applications and people use their smartphones to answer. And there I would say ePRO is for every age groups. And just recently I met a person who's already 100 years old and owns a smartphone and uses WhatsApp to get in contact with his family. So even those age group nowadays uses smartphones and would in general be able to answer simple ePRO questions.
Yeah, that means actually people who have no smartphone are exceptional. Yeah. That's not normal anymore.
It is exceptional, as you mentioned. So older people still sometimes do not have them, but then they at least have their computer and use email and also have their means to answer an ePRO.
And honestly, I can even imagine that electronic data capture is even an advantage for some older people, correct?
Yes, definitely. If you think of a paper questionnaire, then everything is fixed in size. And if your participant cannot read the questions, he cannot answer. If you have an electronic solution, it is easy to just increase the font size or the size of the display of all the questions. And then it's much easier for people who cannot look that well to answer the questions. And this is also what we have observed in several ophthalmology studies where the participants also answer the questionnaires as baseline prior to getting their surgery. So they already have vision problems, but still have very few problems in answering complex and long questionnaires.
Okay, I think the advantages, better data quality, better data integrity, smaller sample size are clear. But what's about the acceptance of the users, so patients and study sites? I can imagine that patients are quite happy, but study sites need longer to explain the patients how the electronic questionnaires and diaries work. Do they like it?
So you already mentioned quite some points. Let's start with the patient view. They usually like it. They are used with electronic devices nowadays, and as the ePRO goes to web-based and easy-to-use applications, they do not complain much as they do not have much extra work. Often it's even easier for them to directly record electronically than on paper. With the sites, of course, it's a bit different. But there it is especially important that your solution is easy to use and easy to explain. And as they need to explain the technical part to the sites, it is very crucial, and this is also what we observed, that the sites are properly prepared for this extra task by training in advance.
Okay, but I think it's even just a matter of time that everybody accepts it. I mean, for younger people, it's more normal to document something electronically than on paper. And both patients are getting younger and also study staff or site staff is getting younger.
I would definitely agree to that. Younger people do record everything electronically and do not use any paper notebooks or something like that anymore.
Let's come to a technical question. According to my knowledge, there are two systems on the market. One is more app-based, where people need to download a software on the device or get the device. And the other, that's what you are using, it's browser-based, where you always need internet connection. So my question would be, what's the advantage of the first and the second system, and if your system needs internet connection, are there any problems nowadays?
So you correctly mentioned the two types of ePRO applications currently on the market. There are some that use native apps that of course have the advantage that the app is directly on the device of the participant, and they can also answer while they are offline. But then, of course, everything they answer is also stored on their device and can easily be accessed if, for example, the participant loses his or her smartphone. On the other hand, you have the web-based applications that, of course, have the drawback that they always need to be connected to the internet. But this gets less and less a problem as the global coverage of internet is increasing and increasing. And in addition, like all applications on the market, also our solution has means to deal with connection issues. So for example, if the patient is currently answering a questionnaire and the connection got lost, the system recognizes this and automatically stores everything that was answered prior to the connection loss. So no data already entered can get lost. And in addition, you have the advantage all the participant answers are only stored on a secured server under our control or not on the local devices and cannot not so easily get lost or get accessed unauthorized.
Yeah, and what kind of internet connection is required? Do you need 4G or even 5G, or how fast does it need to be?
So the solution is aimed to deal with all kinds of internet connections, and so you just need to be connected to the internet. The speed is not so relevant. Of course, it's an advantage to have a faster connection, but also with slower connections, it's quite easy to answer ePRO questionnaires.
Okay, Sebastian, you mentioned now a lot of advantages and everything is logic and clear, but I can also imagine that there are limitations. For what kind of studies would you not use ePRO?
Yes, there are some limitations. You always need to keep in mind what kind of study you are doing and what kind of study population you have in. So, for example, if patient-reported outcome is not collected during a study. If you think, for example, about phase 1 studies, we're just focusing on the safety of a product, it does not always make sense to ask the patients as well. In addition, there are several patient groups which you would not like to bother with additional questionnaires. On the one hand, if you have a very old study population which is not familiar with questionnaires and with the technical details, if you have a very young study population, then you can think about having the parents answer for their children. And last but not least, there are some patient groups where it just would be unethical. You would not ask a patient who has only a few days left in his life for a quality of life or something like that. But if you keep this out, then there are not many limitations anymore for the usage of ePRO.
Okay, sure. If we don't collect patient data directly, we should not think about using ePRO in a study just to use ePRO in a study. That's clear. I can imagine for the future that CRF or data collection via CRFs is getting less important, and I can imagine that ePRO is getting more important. You mentioned already wearables like smartphones where you can measure directly sleeping behavior, heart rate, physical activity, and so on. And by using that, you can collect more and more data directly via ePRO, and you don't need to collect so many data via the CRF anymore, which I can imagine ensures a better data quality. You don't have so much work with source data verification anymore. What do you think? What's the future?
So first of all, we can observe increasing number of requests to include ePRO into clinical studies. So the overall trend is to collect more and more patient-reported outcome. In addition, one trend will be, as already mentioned, the collection of additional data, for example, from wearables like smartwatches. Imagine, for example, a study where the study population has heart issues and you collect a long-time ECG and directly connected to it a patient activity diary and have all these data sources directly in one database. This, of course, makes it much easier to compare and align these data. And for these kind of studies, I would even say that the eCRF loses some of its importance. So you already have the data in one place there. So especially for the observational studies or these kind of studies, the eCRF will lose some of its importance.
I can even imagine for data like concomitant medication. I mean, it's anyway, the patient reports to the investigator, at least for chronic concomitant medication, which medication the patient takes. So why not asking the patient directly, what's your daily medication? And we both know for these adverse events and medication, there are also done a lot of mistakes by the investigational sites, and so I think it would make sense to ask the patient directly.
Definitely, we already have projects where we are doing this and we are making good experience in it. Think, for example, about studies where the population suffers from allergies, then often there is a very limited set of, for example, rescue medication that is taken in case of an event. And then it's much easier and much more reliable if you directly ask the patient, answer directly in ePRO every time you need to take this rescue medication.
Okay, let's come to the end. What would you recommend to a sponsor who has no experience with ePRO yet, and they want to select an ePRO system for the study? What do they need to consider?
So first of all, and most importantly, I would recommend that they focus on a system that is easy to use for everyone involved, especially for the trial participants. They need to answer questionnaires or a diary, and therefore they should have it as easy as possible, and it should be as best as possible integrated into their daily life. And of course, it also needs to be easy for the sites We discussed the topic with the sites needing to explain it to the patients, so also they should have it as easy as possible. Besides that, ePRO is of course always one cost factor for a study, so I would recommend to also go with a solution that is cost effective, but still remains flexible. And last but not least, it's of course very important in the context of clinical trials that the applications used are fully compliant with regulatory requirements, mainly the 21 CFR Part 11.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Sebastian. Thank you very much for the nice interview. It was very interesting, and I think ePRO in general has a great future for sure.
Yes, many thanks, Andreas. It was really a pleasure meeting you today and answer your questions and talk about my expert topic.
Thank you. I also hope that you liked our video about ePRO, that it was attractive for you and you should try it in future when you have not used it yet. Please send us your questions, leave your comments, and if you have another topic you want to discuss, send us a message. Bye bye.